The Carolina Panthers made a decision very quickly in this offseason to retain Ejiro Evero. We can spend all day talking about how historically bad this defense is, but we're not here to go too far into that today. We're here to talk about some coaching changes that have happened. Now, we predicted and almost guaranteed that if Ejiro Evero was going to be retained, there would be fallout underneath him. There's no way the Carolina Panthers could sit back and say, yeah, you know what? That worked great. Even with all the injuries, we look at the play at a few key positions and we'll look at the coaches that have been let go. And the writing was on the wall. And during the exit interview for Dave Canales, there was an acknowledgement that they were going to evaluate everything, even though they're keeping Ejiro Evero. I got to tell you, one of the things that I've been sitting and waiting for was the possibility of Ejiro Evero interviewing somewhere else. And up until this point, and I keep searching and looking, doesn't look like any NFL team is sniffing around. So I think this was a kind of, I guess you say win-win. I don't know if it's a win-win, a lose-lose for the Panthers and Ejiro Evero. It just felt like this was something that both sides were like, okay, we're going to go into the offseason providing that stability and consistency, because there's no way you can say, oh yeah, we're going to go into the offense feeling good about where we sit. But it's enough of that, at least for this second. Let us talk about the staff changes that have happened. So this is being reported by Jeremy Fowler of ESPN. And these are probably the positional groups that you would have imagined the Carolina Panthers would shake things up. So they're moving on from secondary coach Burt Watts. That's number one. Outside linebackers coach Tim Lukabu. And quality control Bobby Maffei, per league sources. So only 3 changes right now, secondary and outside linebackers. And if we're being honest, when we evaluate this team, outside linebacker position didn't have a lot to start with. Like, let's just be real. Look at the rotation of guys that they were bringing in, bringing out, cutting, waiving, signing to the practice squad, bringing them back up, trying to pull people off the streets. Like, we did not have the skill set there. That is a fact. We thought DJ Wonnum and Jadeveon Clowney would be our 1-2 punch with DJ Johnson in rotation, Amari Barno eventually. None of that really worked out. And so we just had a bunch of guys we threw out there for the longest time. I don't even know how many of those guys that were in the rotation will be in the NFL on an active roster next season, a 53-man roster. So change at the outside linebacker position felt like it had to happen. I don't know if it solves everything, because at the end of the day, we are still running a 3-4 scheme that's put together by Ejiro Evero. And these coaches and this staff, you have to remember, they had been together over a year and a half. And if you can't figure out your scheme and your coaching and getting everyone on the same page within that time frame, there's not a lot of hope. You don't see off-season a typically an entire staff staying together. And that's what happened on the defensive side of the ball. No changes from last year going into this year. And so now we do see some change. Again, outside linebackers, okay, well, the scheme's not changing. So, and I don't know how much more you can coach these guys up, but we'll find out. Ejiro is going to have to go out. Dave Canales is going to have to go out and find someone else, or they will as a unit. Remember, this is Canales' team, so he's going to have final say if he has guys that he wants in here. That's the thing about this. You had a whole bucket of Ejiro Evero guys right here. And now Dave Canales can start plugging and playing with guys that he wants. So that is one positive. It's not like this is Ejiro Evero's call on who they bring in. And of course, Dan Morgan also can be involved in this. Burt Watts, secondary. Secondary was atrocious. Again, I don't know how much you chalk that up to the scheme, because we saw the fact that Ejiro Evero did not want to move J.C. Horn around and shadow the number 1 wide receiver. We saw countless times. I mean, just go back to the Falcons game where they ran the same deep ball fade twice. They connected on the second time. The first one was out of bounds. Same thing. We saw continuous miscommunication throughout the season, no matter who was back there. Safeties were atrocious. That entire safety core. Now, I will say Xavier Woods played every snap in the NFL. I believe the only player to do that, the true Iron Man. So hats off to him. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the play was great. Entire secondary was so bad outside of J.C. Horn. Now, Mike Jackson, I'll give him his flowers. But change is due. And then, yeah, your quality control. Okay. So right now, only 3 changes. Now, the bigger question, one, is are more changes going to happen? That's always a possibility. I think about the defensive line, think about the linebacking core. Like all those positions to me could be open and up for change. We will find out. Now, when you start analyzing this, of course, we can hope that Ejiro Evero gets this thing back on track next season. In the event that he does not, you are playing with a very, very short lease, in my opinion, with Ejiro Evero. Here's the thing about a defensive coordinator. You cannot bench a defensive coordinator. You can't say, hey, go sit out. You can't tell them to pass the play calls to someone else. I mean, maybe if you were the head coach and you wanted to call plays and you were a defensive-minded coach, you can't do that. So the only option is to fire someone if things aren't working well. And this is what I said when the decision was made to retain Ejiro Evero. I said, well, that's great. And I'm glad Dave Canales is choosing to go against the grain, choosing to go off of his instinct. But you also have to think what's going to happen when we see a poor defensive performance. Hopefully it doesn't happen early in the season. Do you know what's going to happen especially if it's a home game? What the Bank of America crowd is going to do, the boos are going to be raining down. And I know Tepper's not going to be appreciative of that. It makes you wonder how secure is Ejiro Evero's job going into next year? Something that we're going to have to find out. And I don't know if Canales ends up looking for one of these positional coaches with somebody he likes that he thinks maybe could fill in. You're not going to convince a Robert Saleh to come in here or Steve Wilkes or Aaron Rivera to be a positional coach. So I think you're kind of limited, but you never know along this path of coaching and the coaching tree, someone from previous days in Seattle would seem much more likely because that's where Dave Canales spent most of his time. So I think that could be on the table, but I don't know. It still baffles me that the Panthers chose this. Now, it could all work out. You give Ejiro Evero some better players around him that he can coach. Maybe there's a chance the defense takes off, but I'm not buying it at all right this second. You're going to have to prove it to me that you got it. So it's going to be a fun one. So that is really all we got for today. This is Carolina Dad. As always, thanks for tuning in. See y'all later.